Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to see all of you so early in the morning. Thank you for joining us. I think the weather might have deterred a few, but we'll have a very meaningful morning all the same. I hope you noticed as you walk in the quote of Nelson Mandela on the floor right here. It says, "Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world." Now, I didn't choose the venue knowing that it's written there, but I think it's fitting. Because as a leadership institute, we intend to develop young leaders. But in the same breath, we also honour remarkable leaders, past and present, with their example to us. I don't think any single person deserves more such honour perhaps than our late statesman, Nelson Mandela. His lessons in leadership should and will continue to guide us on our paths as future leaders. The annual Madiba Day Discourse Café is an opportunity to not only reflect on Madiba's legacy, but to also ask some tough questions on where we're going, considering where our country has come from. But to leave no part of his vision untouched, we will be focusing on gender equality this year, trying to answer questions such as, what did Madiba envision for our country in terms of women's rights and gender equality? What did he do in his time to promote women's rights? And did he do enough? And is there a need to continue to work or start anew in promoting gender equality? And what, lastly, ought students do? To help us in this contemplation, we are joined today by Professor Amanda Gouws. Professor Gouws is well known on campus and nationwide as a leading authority on political and gender studies. She's a former commissioner for the Gender Equality Commission of South Africa and a regular commentator on politics and gender rights. Thank you for taking the time to join us, Professor. Seated next to Professor Gouws is Farai Mubaiwa, a recognizable face on campus, student leader, outspoken, self-proclaimed feminist, and former Speaker of Student Parliament. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on the topic as well, Farai. Thanks. So, we'll start out. Professor Gouws has prepared something, and then we'll take the discussion further from there. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and thank you for getting up so early. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you. When I was asked to talk about Mandela and gender equality, I thought one needs to reflect on this because it's not, I think, self-explanatory what Mandela has stood for in relation to women. And the reason for that is that the struggle that Mandela fought for liberation was liberation from racial oppression. And if we look at the history of the ANC at that time, the gender struggle was always subordinate to the racial struggle, even though we cannot sort of dissect our identities, being first black and then a woman, or first a woman and then black or white, what we call intersectionality. Those things make up our identities, but the racial struggle, or the struggle against racial oppression, was the most important struggle during the time of the liberation struggle up to 1994. But this doesn't mean that Mandela was blind to gender equality. And I want to read something from you that he said during the 1996 Women's Day celebrations on 9 August 1996. The legacy of oppression weighs heavily on women. As long as women are bound by poverty and as long as they are looked down upon, human rights will lack substance. As long as outmoded ways of thinking prevent women from making meaningful contributions to society, progress will be slow. As long as the nation refuses to acknowledge the equal role of more than half of itself, it is doomed to failure. Now, those are profound words because it tells us that as he had insight about the oppression of black people in South Africa, he also had insight about gender oppression and the oppression of women. He was also the president that appointed the first Commission for Gender Equality. And during that, this very same speech, he said that this was a very necessary step to eradicate gender inequality. I think if we look now at the 21 years of democracy, what happened in what we call the first parliament, those first 5 years, was very different from the Mandela parliament was very different from the parliaments that followed. And the reason for that was that Mandela trusted his comrades, his colleagues that he appointed or that were elected to parliament and that he appointed in cabinet. So what we saw in 1994 was the leaders, the women leaders of the Women's National Coalition, that was a groundswell movement that included hundreds of organizations, that then said we need at the same time to fight the gender struggle. And what that coalition did up to 94 was to get signatures from and input from more than 1 million women on grassroots level to write the Women's Charter. And in 1994 that was handed to Mandela. But those women were, most of them were feminists. They went into parliament with a vision and a goal on how to create gender equality. And some of them were also appointed at that time to the Commission for Gender Equality. So I think this is what was important for Mandela, is that he did not necessarily have to do the work, but he could trust the people, the women and some men at that time, to do the work and to create the conditions for gender equality. And he didn't interfere. I think this is the other important thing, that his trust meant that he did not have to interfere with the work that was going on. And it was in those first 5 years that we made over 30 pieces of legislation. We wrote more than 30 acts that had directly some impact on the creation of gender equality. So that was a period under his leadership that was very important for the creation of gender equality. And I want to say that I think if we look at his legacy, there are 5 characteristics that he had that for me is very important when we think about his legacy. And the first one is the issue of inclusion. What Mandela did was to say that the greatest injustice in South Africa was the exclusion of the majority of the people of this country from a democratic citizenship. And that's what he fought for. He also fought for the inclusion to create human dignity, to create equality, and to create freedom. So inclusion was very important for him. And he raised consciousness through his own struggles around that. Now, if we look at the situation today, that the majority of women are still excluded from complete or what we could call full citizenship. People who live in the rural areas, women who live there under customary law, the exclusion from literacy, the exclusion from education. We only have 7% women in the corporate sector in management positions. So that type of exclusions continue, and so we need to raise the consciousness around that. The second aspect, I would say, is the issue that he adhered to an ideology of non-racialism. And that meant he didn't say that one race is going to be at the top of the hierarchy, one race is better than another. It was going to be equality for all race groups, so that in the end race wouldn't matter anymore. And I think this is what the struggle for gender equality also means, is that it is the equality between genders. And I mean, we are now also starting to talk about third genders, right? Between genders, not to single out one gender or to create a hierarchy. And we still need to work towards that ideology of equal treatment of all genders. The third aspect is that he was a man of integrity. He fought that struggle. He was prepared to die for that struggle. And he welcomed everybody who was prepared to share his vision. And I think for me, feminism is that vision, that principled struggle that we have to fight, or that we have to use to fight the struggle for gender equality. And I know that's a controversial thing to say because many people don't want to have the label of feminism, or they see feminism or feminists as women who hate men, which is based completely on a misunderstanding of what feminism is. So feminism is that principled struggle that we need to fight for gender equality. I often hear young women say, I want all kinds of issues connected to gender equality, but I'm not a feminist. Now that is a complete contradiction. So, so that's the integrity, is that you also have to embrace that label. In the fourth aspect, he had a vision. He had a vision of what a non-racial society would look like, and he was prepared to fight for that vision. And like I said, I mean, that's this wonderful quote from him that he says, I've spent my life fighting for this vision, but if so, it's also something that I'm prepared to die for. So we need to have a vision. We need to have an understanding of what a gender equal society would look like. If we kept ourselves bound to the roles of women and how we interpret those roles, we cannot envision anything beyond that. So we have to think outside the box. And I think what makes the fight for gender equality more difficult, in a sense, than the fight for racial equality, is that there was solidarity among race groups, but there's not solidarity among men and women. I always say we sleep with the enemy, so it's very difficult to fight with the ones we love, right? So that solidarity is one thing that Mandela could create and that we need to create. And that he did not expect others to do it. He did it himself. He fought that struggle. He went to prison for that struggle. So we cannot expect other people to liberate women. Women have to liberate themselves, but we need men as allies. And then in the last instances, he accepted the consequences of the liberation struggle. Now that meant incarceration, it meant humiliation, it meant separation from family, and it could even have meant death. He was lucky to escape the death penalty, but it was always a possibility. And he came out on the other side triumphant. So the struggle for gender equality, in my own life experience, is that you will suffer from rejection, you will be labeled, you will be alienated from some people, and in some cases you will be separated from family. I mean, in my own life, not everybody in my family has accepted the journey that I have walked on in terms of my own struggles for gender equality. So it's not always easy. But that's what Mandela was prepared to do, and I think if we're really serious about gender equality, we will have to also prepare to suffer some form of negative consequences. So I want to conclude by saying that if we apply the same principles that Mandela did to the liberation struggle, the struggle to free us from racialism, racial discrimination, racism, and to move towards a democracy, we can transfer that onto a struggle for gender equality, and we can apply all those principles. So in a sense, he has created for us a framework for the struggle against all types of inequality. And we know that in the Constitution that he was very, very deeply involved with. In the Bill of Rights, there are 5 grounds that we are not allowed to discriminate on: sex, gender, sexual orientation, pregnancy, and marital status. So it's in the Bill of Rights. So the equality that he fought for was already much broader as it was included in the Constitution. Thank you.
Farai, I'd like to respond to that, or tell us what personal lessons you've learned.
I think something that Mandela has taught my family and I is this idea and this concept that you have to understand a person. And I think that's what society gets wrong so often, that you meet someone, and because tolerance is constantly promoted, you just tolerate them and you tolerate their views. But when you tolerate them, you don't understand why they are who they are. You don't understand why they have certain ideologies, why they have certain practices and beliefs. And that's such a problem, because that then leads to people being marginalized or discriminated or just cast out from society completely. And that's something that my mom has always told me. She's always been like, Farai, you can't get through life if you don't understand people. And for me, that's incredible, because it's something that Mandela has always been. Yes, he's taught us about Ubuntu. Yes, he's taught us to love one another, but you can't love a person without understanding them. And just an example of this, and especially in terms of the gender inequality here, is that I remember my first day at Rose, I was like, I came to Stellenbosch simply because I was offered a bursary. And my mom being a single parent, this was our best option. And the first day, I just heard Afrikaans. And I freaked out, because I was like, yes, I'm used to environments where, yes, you can count how many black people there are in the classroom, but I'm not used to environments where there's this complete difference in culture and heritage. And I said to her, I need to go to UCT. I can't be in an all-girls race with many traditional views and beliefs. I can't be here. And she said, Farai, you need to learn to understand people. You can't judge people. You can't just want to tolerate them. And that was a turning point. And my roommate, being the most Afrikaans person I've ever met in my life, not speaking English at all, and the fact that she immediately took to understanding me meant so much. And I feel that if society really has that response towards each other, then we can really progress in a great case. And something that I often experience on this campus as well is that because I label myself as a feminist, and I remember in high school it wasn't always like this, I always noticed that there were these roles that weren't okay. I noticed that, for example, in grade 10 we had the baby project, which I hated. And they paired...
As a mother, I had to deal with that.
and they paired male and female, this and that, but it was always the female that had the baby. And the one guy I was paired with left our baby in the tree. And I couldn't understand what his logic was. And he was like, it's fine, you fetch the baby. And I noticed that, but I didn't understand that it was deeply rooted in society, that it was once again the arrogance of the patriarchy just asserting itself on everyone in society. And then I came to university and I started to realize that, especially with me being in Reyes, I realized the hierarchy between males' Reyes and females' residences. I realized this thing of, if you're invited to a culture evening, it's the biggest thing because, hey, a guy's Reyes is considering you, but why should it be that way? Why should it have that hype? And especially in leadership, I realized that if I'd raise a comment or an opinion, I'd be ignored, I'd be cast aside. But then things would go awfully, and then those same leaders would come back to me and be like, Farai, what did you say again? And for me, that's the best feeling ever, because I know that often I'm undermined simply because I'm a woman, but I understand that it's the patriarchy, and it's because so often people are just so used to it, but I understand that it's my responsibility to change that as well.
Hi. What year are you? Sorry.
30th.
You're 30 this year. I don't get paid to hate anyone. I don't get paid to be a feminist. I don't get paid, and I give my services for free, right? If I am in any circle, I was given certain things in first year so that the people around me respect me, but more of that gave a lot self-worth of me. Hey, then now that I'm fifth year in an undergrad course, this university has taught me, listen, you don't get paid. You don't get paid to hate anyone. You don't, you use the opportunity that you've been given. You appreciate everything that is given to you, and everyone is human. I went through a lot just to build my characteristics in this university, something that a lot of people haven't gotten, and I've learned to be appreciative and not to complain, and to understand that if I say something and someone doesn't listen to me, I should fix myself first. I should pray for myself, then pray for the other person, hey, because we're all human and we're all not perfect, hey. And I feel that in our society, we shouldn't hate each other. It's pointless. You gain nothing from it. They're complaining all the time. But I love that the grown-ups come in and they teach us things like feminism and listen, be aware of this. And listen, be aware of what Mandela stands for and what rights stand for. And I love what Stellenbosch stands for. I love this university and I'd never want to change it. Hey, but but that's just something I wanted to leave with you, that hate, whenever you are faced with a situation where you have to have a negative feeling, check, are you benefiting from it? If you're not benefiting from it, don't. Try to always look for the light. That's something that I was taught in courses by the girls who I was in courses, wonderful girls. I was in courses, I love them all. My roommate was placed with, I had 3 roommates. Okay. Of all 3, this was a lot since I'm actually in a 3-year change, were wonderful people. And they inspired me and they helped me grow. But they mostly, my being here and the whole environment has taught me to always choose life. And I really appreciate Stellenbosch and what they stand for. And the women, like, it's incredible. Like, if you look at the history, hey.
Can I say something? I want to come back to the point Farai made about tolerance. I absolutely agree with you. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on political tolerance, and I mean, this is the thing. If you only tolerate, you don't move beyond. And you're always the guest, the host. You host other people, but you don't change. So one has to move beyond that. But I think for me, it's the issue of consciousness raising. And that is very often taking people out of comfort zones. It doesn't mean you hate people, but you have to create conditions where people have to think about things, you know. This baby project, right? My daughter had to carry this pumpkin. It was a butternut met 'n hoekie op en 2 oogies. And you know what I saw when I dropped them off in the morning at school? All the grade 11, grade 10s, with these butternuts wrapped in blankets. It looked like girls who had babies out of wedlock. And I mean, I'm not making a judgment here about babies out of wedlock, but what I'm saying is that why do you want to create a situation where all the focus is on the girls? They are being taught to mother. And I mean, my daughter is in a girls' school. There wasn't even a boy involved. So what is this about? So I had a chat with a teacher who said, we teach them responsibility. Well, hell, I can think up 10 projects right now to teach people responsibility. And that's not about carrying babies around. So, and that's the thing about raising consciousness. I always say to my students, there is no bigger hell than a raised consciousness, because then you see the issues around you. And you then you understand that it has to change. And that's the hard part of it.
Always carrying rugby balls.
Met oogies.
Can we turn the conversation then to, I'd like to understand from the two of you, what is the problem? How can we speak about the problem? How can we realize that there, or make other people realize that there is a problem? So what is at the core of the gender equality problem? And moving on then to what's the solution? What can we do every day? So maybe firstly you can paint the picture. What does South Africa look like? What are we maybe not even aware of? Stellenbosch, Verizon, and a few things here.
Well, I think, and Farai has mentioned this as well, is the roles that we are socialized into, right? So there is the feminine and there is the masculine, and women are thought of as, homemakers, caring for children, doing the care work, and men are the breadwinners and going into the labor market, becoming the politicians. And I mean, that's very stereotypical. Of course, that has changed. But if you look at the bottom, how society still thinks about issues like that, it's that, right? I mean, I talk to male students who think their wives should be the homemakers and the child rearers, and they're going into the big world, but women, there's a different role for women, and that's just absolutely nonsense. So it's about that type of socialization, but it is also about understanding the world in which what is considered the values of women are devalued, right? So care work, let's take care work. If you look who care for small children, who care for the aged, who care for people with disabilities, who are nurses, social workers, mostly women. And they get paid the least in society because care work isn't very valued, and you take them out of society and society can't function. So it's also about how we devalue things that women do. At Stellenbosch University, women lecturers in the different ranks don't get paid the same as men. Why? What is the logical reason for that, right? And I mean, that's also changing. But so it is, and then the incredible levels of violence against women, right? A society that's brutalizing women, objectifying women, turning them into objects, right? The pornography industry is $1 trillion industry that makes its money off the objectification and subjugation of women. It's got nothing to do with relationship. It's got nothing to do with intimacy. And you may think this doesn't, this is something beyond what I am thinking about. I had a student in my office yesterday who came to ask me my advice. She said she's been dating this very nice guy, and they've been now known each other for about 3 weeks, and then he sent her a pornographic clip. And he thinks that, this is how they should deal with their relationship. And she was devastated, right? But if men are exposed to pornography, that's what the image of a relationship becomes about. It's not the idea of intimacy and developing a relationship. It becomes something else. So I'm just touching on a number of things, but it is this deeply ingrained understanding of women's inferiority, and I think to turn that around, it's on an attitudinal level, it's on an educational level, it's on the level of a lived experience. And that makes it, I think, for me, it's on all those levels we have to turn around the issues of how we view women. Let's just take I call it, well, in the literature it's called the Madonna and the whore spectrum, right? Madonna is the mother of Jesus and the prostitute. So good girls are on this side and the bad girls here, and so a guy who dates a lot of women, he's a stud, but if a woman does the same, she's a slut, right? So we have two standards that we measure with, and the same that applies for men doesn't apply for women, and the other way around.
I actually wrote a piece just 3 weeks ago, and I was expressing how there hasn't been a day in this country when I have not been catcalled or wolf whistled or called baby. And I just remember I was in grade 4, and the first experience I had was when I was in the back seat of the car coming from school after an intense day of grade 4, and I was just lying down, and there was a man just outside the window. And my father was driving, very oblivious to anything that was happening with the van. And this man smiled at me, and I remember I smiled at him as well. I was like, yeah, great, because my mom has always taught me, when people smile at you, you smile back. And then suddenly his smile changed, and it was this very sinister sort of smile. And I felt so uncomfortable. And I remember he stood there, and then he just looked at me in this way that, even if I think about it now, I still feel so shaky about it. And we drove off, and for a few days I was trying to understand what happened, why was I feeling so uncomfortable. And then from that day I started to realize that whenever I walk somewhere, whenever I'm with friends, or I could be in a club or something. It's that same look. And it's always as if as females, once we're brought into this world, we don't own our bodies. It's as if there are expectations for how we need to carry ourselves, expectations what we're meant to do with our bodies. And it's sad, and I think in society our aim should be to give the female back her body. And until we can reach that stage in society, then we won't get far at all, and society will continue to have this perpetuated gender inequality. And Amanda said so well that there's this understanding that women are inferior. And you see that everywhere in society. I could walk to Checkers and there'll be a man following me in the aisle. And it's not because I'm good looking, it's because I'm a female. And that's constantly happening, and it frustrates me when I hear of young girls who are followed around in a shopping mall, or young girls who are catcalled or wolf whistled even by security guards at their own complexes or their own estates. And society needs to understand, and men as well, they need to understand that they don't own a woman. And I think culture plays a big role in this, in the sense that within my culture as well, my family is Zulu, and within that as well, I was always told that, okay, you serve the men at funerals, you dish out all the food, and if you ask me nicely, I'll do that, of course, but it shouldn't be expected of me simply because I'm a female. And that's where I think we need to really consider cultural relativism and consider what we can change and what needs to be adjusted, because just because, and society has this thing that if it's been happening like this for hundreds of years, let's keep it. But just because it's been happening doesn't mean it's okay.
Anyone wants to add to that, but it's still not solutions. What can we do? What can students do? What can adults do? What's the next step?
I was thinking this holiday that we really need to improve how our education system conscientizes people. And at the moment, we sort of have this education system that just says your important subjects are math, science, English. You finish there after 12 years, you go to university. But what does that actually equip us with? Because we come out of high school not conscientized. We come out of high school not understanding other people. And we've got life orientation, the subject that always prides itself on really conscientizing the students. Yet the baby project taught me nothing except I need to be a single mother. And I really think that through our education system, we need to have subjects that can really teach people to understand each other, especially with something like, for example, in history, we learn so much about the Cold War, which is great. I mean, we should have some sort of knowledge about it, but we spend then a week on women's rights and that's done. But we need to have a system that can teach us about women's rights just as much as we learn about apartheid or black consciousness. We need to have a system that teaches us about, okay, our current situation, how males and females are meant to adapt to this, how we're meant to change things so that things aren't perpetuated. And we need to have a system whereby in schools as well, the teachers need to teach guys in class as well. Because I had so many experiences in matric when I'd walk into class, and because I'm short, my bag would be put at the top of the shelf. And the teacher just laughed, everyone laughed. And yes, it was funny the first 2 times it happened. Afterwards, I was frustrated. But it continued that way. And it's even small things like that that we need to change. So I think through education, we really can change the gender inequality, especially if we also then teach men not to view women as not being smart or undermining women. Yet you see academically that, hey, we can excel just as much as you can. And I think in terms of university, especially with this campus, the residence culture is just too strong. And it frustrates me because the residences, they get away with so much, even though it's wrong. And the other day I saw a poster by one of the residences where they were having a uniform party at the male's residence. And it was, okay, men, your options are policeman. Woman, your option is slutty policewoman. Men, your option is fireman. Woman, your option is slutty firewoman. And I'm just like, it was all around campus. It was stamped by the student body. And I was just, where is the thought process? Because in having such images around, we are perpetuating this idea that it's okay. I mean, at one of the other females' residences, they had a party called CEOs and Office Hoes. And I was like, but what if I want to be a CEO? Why do you want to label me in this? And on campus, we really need to change this culture where males' residences are stronger than females' residences. I think that every residence and PSO must do the gender identity project through the Institute. We just need to have a campus that conscientizes people. And I think a great idea would be for every first year on campus to get a book. And this book they need to read before they graduate. Unless they read it, they cannot leave this place. And this book needs to conscientize them. It needs to be a book about the current situation in South Africa racially, in terms of gender inequality, in terms of poverty, the economic instability. It needs to be there because we can't keep on producing these people who we think are intellectuals, but actually end up being the most ignorant people in our society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was very important. Many years ago, we did sexual harassment orientation with the first years. We did to talk about homophobia and things like that. That was taken away from specifically me, who was tasked with that, and then argued that the Hakas should do that. Well, they don't. I had one of the male reses, it's about a decade ago now, came into my class, the men wearing a T-shirt that said on the front, "If at first you don't succeed, just give it another beer." Now that's an invitation to rape, right? And I sent those students out of my classroom because I wasn't going to tolerate that. But I became the bully in the story, right? So women students, I recently spoke to another group of students, talk about a rape culture in the residences. Why do we tolerate that, right? What is it that makes this acceptable? I mean, this poster is horrendous. I didn't see it, but yeah. You wanted to.
Yeah, I just want to tell a story first. I was in the UK in the 70s when they had their first gender equality legislation. And the immediate impact, of course, was on recruitment. And I remember advertisement, somebody looking for bricklayers. And say, so he said in the advertisement, should be willing to strip to the waist in summer. And to make his point. So what I wanted to ask you was, is gender equality part about women becoming more like men, or men becoming more like women?
Well, you see, it's neither. It is about accepting the difference. And this, I think if I can just talk about different types of feminism, is that liberal feminism, which is what most governments use in our own government, is that you give women equal opportunities or give black people equal opportunities and all of a sudden we're all equal. So we use sameness as the measurement. While if you look at radical feminism, the argument is you use difference because we are different and therefore we need to create different type of solutions. And the body then becomes central. Why is it that when a woman gets pregnant, she is discriminated against, right? We now have legislation that prevents that, but in the past, many companies didn't give maternity leave. So women had to face this choice to resign. What man ever has to face that choice when they because couples become pregnant? So it's using difference as a measure and then creating solutions that fit the difference, not the sameness. I mean, this is how I think is the best possible solution.
And also, just to maybe add on that male-female kind of binary that we created, there's also this idea that when we say we're becoming more like men or becoming more like women, it's the idea that this defines what a man is and this defines what a woman is in the first place. And that's also why the patriarchy influences not only women but also men who don't subscribe to this hyper-masculine kind of ideal, or women who subscribe to the feminism. So I think even starting at questioning what it means to be a man or woman outside of maybe sexual or gender identity, which then brings in the question of trans people, is also very important when we talk about gender and feminism.
Yeah, good point.
So the biggest lesson that I've learned through African philosophy that I did this year is that through the whole Black consciousness movement is that the biggest desire is that Black people must speak for themselves with these issues. And my question then is, so as a man who wants to fight for feminism, what is my role in that? Because you don't want to step on that line where it's men speaking for women. Yet you want to fight for gender equality. So.
That's what I mean by the solidarity, is that you support the goals, right? And we don't want men to speak on behalf of us, but you can make a point about gender equality very easily as well as a woman can. And I mean, I often wonder, I would sit in tea rooms where men make the most horrendous sexist jokes and other men says nothing. They say nothing. So it's always up to the women to say something. So it's in conditions like that if you say, well, I mean, this is not an okay joke to make, men hear it because it comes from another man. When a woman says it, they don't hear it. So, and that's how you can be allies. So, yeah.
I've got lots of friends, male friends, who identify themselves as feminists. And they'll do exactly that. If there's a comment that is passed off that between guys may be seen as hilarious, he will then speak up and be like, this is not okay. And I think we need more of that. And that's actually what gives me hope about our society, is that we've got men who are able to speak up about gender inequality. And yes, the racist society is quite messed up, but the fact that we've got those men means that there's something happening and there's a change happening. And the more of those men that speak up, the more we can conscientize people.
Okay. I think it's actually something we did yesterday in class for legal philosophy, that you're talking about, Professor, about how there's been so much, or a lot of legislation, gender equality legislation has been passed for the last 20 years, and we probably have the most legislation in terms of gender equality in the world. Yet, I mean, women still face violence, poverty, sexual harassment, and all those sort of issues. And it got to quite an interesting discussion about the role of the law in terms of just shaping society and changing society. And obviously we've seen how laws change society to the bad with the party, and how sort of systematically established racial superiority and gender superiority as well, because we mustn't forget how apartheid has also got the white man being superior to any other type of person as well. So in terms of, obviously now we have sort of policies, legislation everywhere. I want to say on this campus, but probably not right now, but everywhere, at least in South Africa, that has all these rules. But now, obviously, it's now the translation of making that practical. And yeah, like what? That's I think that's where the problem is. Like, what can be sort of practically done to sort of get people to just change tomorrow? And I think the solution is maybe just, as Farai said, we need to make sure that, especially on this campus where we can sort of have control, that if we can have everyone going through some sort of like awareness or consciousness drive, that would be great. But especially the leaders that sort of perpetuate a system of X, Y, and Z, that I think as a first year you only realize when you're a bit older, oh, that was not okay, type of thing. And that's, I think, something I went through in the last year or so, just thinking, damn, I actually let a lot slip. Yeah, it's something that we have to just look at as well.
Well, I think this is the problem with legislation, right? We have really good laws. And if we take the Sexual Offences Act, it's a very good law. But it fails in its implementation because it's doing nothing to curb the violence against women. So we cannot only rely on the law. And that is the issue of, and you mentioned this, is that, what is being done in schools, because it's a process of socialization. I mean, what happened to all of us who sit here, at some point, we change our attitudes, right? From like you think about things now very differently. Is that very little is done in schools, and that is not for a lack of trying on some, for example, I mean, as political scientists, we have asked to create a curriculum on civic education for government. We were prepared to do it, but government's not interested. So we also have a problem with government. And the fact that we are rolling back the gains, right? We've closed down the Ministry for Women, Youth and People with Disabilities. We've closed down all the structures that dealt with gender equality in the state. They're all closed down now. except for the Commission for Gender Equality. But I mean, the problem is attitudinal. If we, for example, today would have a referendum and ask the population, do you want the death penalty back? We'll have a majority. If you ask them if they're satisfied with the fact that abortion was legalized, they will say no. So your attitudes of your population is, the legislation and the constitution is far ahead of the population. And that can only change through consciousness raising and education and so on. And that's why I think we need to do more on the university level. We need to reach all the students, and we don't. I mean, there are not even classes in the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, my faculty, on an undergraduate level that deals with gender. If you want to teach gender, you have to sneak it through the back door, right? So, and that means that when you have courses on a postgrad level, you don't get students because they have no idea what this is about. And I think that also we have to think about curriculum change. Just as we think about it around issues of race, we now have to think around it as well around issues of gender.
I think I must agree with saying starting it from a younger age, because I even found myself, I think I'd see myself as someone who has a modern view on gender and what my role is within a relationship and within society. And I caught myself the other day thinking something specific about what I am supposed to do, because it's a social construct, and I've always been preaching to friends on the discussion that we had, saying gender is social, and the things that we think about what's normal and what's good, and as we said, we need to start thinking about what really is masculine and what is feminine, and we also had a course on it. And the problem really is, first of all, in school, and then also who teaches you. I'm not saying we have bad teachers generally, but if you don't have someone that's passionate about something, as we are at the moment here, you end up not even listening. If we spoke about AIDS, a lot of times they'd say, not orientation we've had, it sort of was brushed off, drugs was brushed off, and those are the kind of discussions we have. So if you also just have a teacher teaching you feminism or gender roles, and it's just something that you're doing, it ends up not being good. It's something that you tolerate and not something that you understand. And the problem is, I think the big problem is, first of all, it's the social construct, and secondly, it's getting people not to sit and just hear what you say, but actually listen what you say. And that comes from in every person. You need to decide yourself that you're actually taking in and understanding how to tolerate. And the only way that we maybe can get people to do that is by continuously having discussions like this, and also starting at the younger age where je meer vakbaar op en meer inneem. En nie net luister, nie net sit en hoor en nie luister.
It's very interesting. I was asked to come and talk at my daughter's school about sexual harassment. So when I walked in there, I asked, the first thing I did, I was like, how many of you thought you have been sexually harassed in the past? And there were 3 hands. And then I talked to them about the spectrum of behaviors and things that we can classify as sexual harassment. And in the end, when I asked them, so how many of you think now that you were sexually harassed? It was more than half. So it's also, don't get the necessary information and blaming themselves for things that happen, right? Not understanding that this is a social construct, and how people then act on those ideas that they have about gender and so on, this catcalls. It's a very acceptable thing, right? Until somebody tells you it's not. So I agree with you, it has to start at a much earlier age.
I think also as students in university, we undermine how much power we have. And it's so interesting because you hear our discussions and we're always told that, hey, we're the future leaders, but the nonsense we do on campus doesn't reflect that. And what's so interesting, you just mentioned how so often women will blame themselves. On campus, at the beginning of this year, when there was that alleged rape, everyone immediately said, oh, was she drunk? What was she wearing? What did she do? Why was that first year there anyway? But those aren't the questions that we should be asking. What we should be asking is, why did this guy think that he could assert his male entitlement on this girl? And it frustrated me to be told by the promo admirers that, girls, please dress appropriately, we need to avoid such situations. I remember in our ARCA group, many of us turned and thought, what in the actual, where is this coming from? How can you make such a comment? I bet so many of the girls who dress were like, yeah, we'll be careful, but they don't even realize the fact that in saying that they are blaming themselves, they are allowing they're allowing all these reasons for rape to be legitimate, yet the actual problem is the action of it, is that sense of entitlement.
In the fight against in the fight to dismantle patriarchy and to promote gender equality, how does one distinguish between fighting the system and fighting individuals perpetuating the system? If we say that, as you said, Farai, that you need to try and understand where people are coming from. I think many men and women are obviously brought up in a specific way and so on, and so to a large extent they don't have obviously a say in the kind of mindsets that they are brought up with. Yet those mindsets are obviously very problematic, and it perpetuates patriarchy. So I'm interested to know how if you have comments about that, how we distinguish between the individuals and the system, whether we need to distinguish at all.
Well, I mean, the system doesn't have a life of its own. It has to be enforced in some ways, and that is male privilege. Now, that's the same thing as white privilege. It's invisible, it's not talked about, and people will be very surprised when you tell them that you are part of a privileged system. But men benefit from patriarchy, so they have a vested interest in keeping patriarchy. And unless we make them aware of the privilege, like black people make white people aware of their privilege, that's what Open Stellenbosch Forum is about, that's what Road Must Fall is about, people are not going to think about it, they're not going to reflect about it. They may not like it, I mean. But that sense of entitlement comes from that privilege. I mean, why do women change their last names when they get married? Because they become the property of someone. It's not property in the real sense, but that's how it's implemented. So and if you say that to men, they think you're crazy. But that is how it works. So it is this invisible privilege that is being enforced by women as well. Women are also keeping patriarchy intact by not wanting to, or undermining women who are feminists, or not being critical or not challenging. Because, when you start to change things, everything changes, and most people don't like change. I think it's very difficult to say you challenge the system, but the system is kept in place by individuals, so you have to challenge the individuals.
And just with that, you'd be surprised how many individuals aren't even aware, because it's their routine. They do it every day, so they're so used to it. And you just need to, I think, just as an individual, you need to make the effort to be able to make people aware of the patriarchy and of gender inequality. And for example, this holiday I did back work at Deloitte. And the first day there, we sat in a room and they're like, okay guys, listen, we have to talk about dress. And these were two ladies who were talking to us. They said, for the girls, and this was honestly the comment, they said, you can't come to work looking like a slut. And I sat there and I was thinking, these are grown women making these comments. And so many of the students there, or the UCT and the Stellenbosch ones who were there, just thought, where does that even come from? And the comment to the men was, you guys are fine, you can come to work like that. And then I remember I challenged this lady and I said to her, but you can't say that. How do you define what a slut is? Why are you even making this comment? Surely if you want to say come to work appropriately, phrase it differently. But then again, what determines what is appropriate and appropriate for who? So I think in her saying that, she didn't realize that she was now a part of the system. And for her, it was just work attire But after us having discussions, she then realized that she was perpetuating the gender imbalance.
I just wanted to ask, because it's a question that I've also struggled with and like even tried to write to get my thoughts out. But as there are ideals for feminism, can we say that there are, because there's like this idea of inclusive feminism as well, and that it's important to appreciate that women have different life choices and that they can be feminists in their own right. But do we, in that inclusive feminism, is it okay to include behaviors that are, in a sense, almost anti-feminist or undermine feminism? And where's the balance in that? So I mean, there's lots of divides. So, for example, people say that the burqa that Muslims wear is an oppressive symbol of patriarchy, but there are many women who feel empowered to wear their burqa and like define their sexuality and their religious practice, or the institution of becoming a housewife, where many women feel that maybe that's something they want to do, but at the same time it's also it can be a dangerous decision in the sense that you then become dependent on your husband or your partner, whoever in your relationship is bringing in money. So how do we think about those kinds of acts?
Yeah, I don't know what inclusive feminism means, because I don't. All feminisms are inclusive, but I think it's how it's interpreted that people see exclusions. If you stretch the concept feminism to its limits, then it has no meaning, as far as I'm concerned. So I think what you talk about is a sensitivity towards choices, and that's why, for example, we've called the legislation that made abortion legal the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act, which means all it does, it gives women a choice. And this is what feminism is about, is that you should open spaces for women to have choices. And that's why I say all feminism is inclusive, because it is about choice in the end. But I think it becomes very complicated when we talk about culture. So is wearing a burqa culture, or is it religion, right? And the headscarf, the same thing. And a lot of it is also political. So, but for me, it's about a sensitivity towards women, other women's or other people's culture, right? So we need to ask, what is the meaning of the burqa for you? And we need to be sensitive towards that. I mean, there's women would tell you. Let me give you this very good example. You all know who wrote The Color Purple? What is her name? Walker? Feminist, American feminist, right? She got herself a team together, a team of filmmakers, and they went to a country in Africa. I've now forgotten which country it was, but it's a country where they practice clitoridectomy, which is female circumcision, which is abhorred in many contexts as a form of bodily violation, right, of women. And when they came to this country and they said, well, we're here to make a film about female circumcision, the woman said to them, you come here with your preconceived ideas about female circumcision. You think that we are oppressed. You think that we haven't thought about this practice. So you get back on your plane and go back. And they literally put them back on the plane. Now, so I mean, and that to me illustrates something about a misunderstanding, right? She's a feminist. She knew that, I mean, when we read her work, we consider her a feminist. But it was that insensitivity towards the culture of the other. So we all have others, and we all have to make sure that we understand the culture of the others. Same in South Africa with Lobola, right? There are African women who say, no, this is oppressive, and there are other African women who say it's a cultural practice that unites families. And we have to be sensitive towards that. I mean, Farai, how do you feel about that? Not Lobola, I mean.
Very true, and you're absolutely correct in saying that there is a level of sensitivity. And I've got many Muslim friends, and speaking to them, me seeing myself as a feminist, it's always so interesting to hear that what I see as oppressive, they see it as uplifting. And for especially within my family, I've told my grandparents that I'm against the practice of lobola. I said I don't want a price put on me, and I gave them all my justifications. And for my grandmother, she said, no, but it's an amazing thing. It's showing that you're of value. It's showing that you're of worth. So there is that level of sensitivity that's important to have. But I think what's always important is to make sure that women understand that they are not objects and that their bodies belong to them. So through all this sensitivity, there must be that realization.
I want to underline some things that were said and linked to another quote of Mandela, the one about education being the most powerful weapon to change our lives. As was said, we need from the very earliest stages inclusion in our curricula, right, primary to tertiary, and the extent to which we want to do it. Does a university want to have an orientation course of sorts, like at UFH or at Free State? They have something called UFS 101. But there are choices that universities make as to the kinds of things, the kinds of valuable lessons that students should learn, and all students. And it's also important about who teaches you, because how does one teach? There's an old quote that says, what will teach you what you should become? Not all the books on all the shelves, but who the teachers are themselves. So that kind of living forth, die voortleef van of the desired attributes it's very, very important. And then especially males have a crucial role. I got to know about the He for She campaign recently, and it focuses on the role of males to be agents for gender equality, and especially in those situations where the jokes are made and you feel, should I or shouldn't I? That's when we should, especially for somebody like me that's raising a boy child. It's important. So just as there were in the struggle for racial oppression, against racial oppression, there were white people who really contributed in ways that were very significant. Males and young men can play an important role.
Thanks, Jim.
I think we're going to end up there. I just want to say from my side, the sun is come out, but it gives me a lot of hope seeing that a group of students, although smaller numbers, can come out early in the morning to voluntarily discuss something important as this. And I think it's something that will grow in importance and in numbers. And we're so privileged to be joined by people with such knowledge and experience in the field. So Professor Gouws, thank you very, very much. We appreciate your time here. And hereby, I'd like to acknowledge you as an honorary member of the Political.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. It was a big pleasure.
And I should mention it's one of very few women who have received that certificate, and that's what we're trying to change. And Farai, you're already one of us, but I'm going to give you a bottle of wine at a later stage. Thank you for being here. And thank you all. And please help us finish breakfast before you go off to class. Thank you.